This is Deb Masker from Kern. How are you?
Doing great. Yourself?
Not too bad. I'm going to turn this over to my two trusty students here. And we would like to get your perspective on the work that you have done on the film and maybe some of your ideas about the incident. The theme for History Day is conflict and compromise. And so we would also hope that you can kind of give your perspective based on what you know.
Yeah, and that's actually the subtitle of the film that we're working on.
Oh, cool. Well, this is exciting.
Except we added the word rural conflict and compromise.
Well, our title is Reading, Writing, and Religion.
Okay.
So that's what we're going with. So I'm going to turn this over to Jocelyn and Hannah. And girls, you have to talk really loud.
Okay.
And here we go.
Okay, so as Ms. Masker said, this year's theme is conflict and compromise. How do you think the incident in Hazleton matches the theme of conflict?
I heard most of that. Could you repeat just the last part there?
How do you think the incident in Hazleton matches the theme of conflict?
Oh. Well, the incident was sparked by a conflict between religious and educational practices of the Amish and requirements indicated by Iowa state law.
Okay, was there a compromise on either side?
Yeah, I mean, I want to just, as by way of a disclaimer, I'll just remind you that we're kind of at the beginning of this film project, and although we have collected a lot of material, we haven't digested it all, and so I can speak generally, but perhaps not specifically about certain things.
Mm-hmm.
The compromises, I think, were largely on the side of the state of Iowa. And that's because the Amish didn't give in. I mean, they were willing to go to jail and to pay fines, and the photograph that was taken by Tom DeFeo that appeared in the Register and then appeared literally in newspapers throughout the country and around the world even. Created a public relations problem for the state of Iowa. Now the way they describe that is that it created bad optics. Iowa state officials or local officials chasing Amish children into a cornfield. I mean, that's not what they were doing, but that's what it appeared they were doing. And so it did create I guess in a sense, it set up the compromise really to take place in the Amish, in favor of the Amish, and what they wanted to do.
So, as you were preparing this film, who did you interview and who do you think would be the principal people involved?
Yeah, the list of people we interviewed, and I should describe how we ran into this story. We were shooting footage for a documentary called Country School, One Room, One Nation.
Mm.
And that was a 3-year project, and we visited about 100 one-room schools in Iowa, Kansas, and Wisconsin. And in the course of doing the research for that documentary, which was released in 2010, we ran into this Amish school incident story. And at the time, we didn't know if we would incorporate it in the film or not. And we didn't. But we did interviews with, and I'm not going to be able to remember his name, I'm thinking. But last name, I think, was Lemon, and he was an attorney that was involved. And then felt we needed, in addition to that, when we started talking about turning this into its own short film, was Arthur Sensor, who we interviewed last year. We actually did his interview on the day of the solar eclipse. So as the solar eclipse was happening, we pulled over on the way down to Muscatine and did his interview then.
That's cool.
And the other interview, which we don't have recorded yet, is with members of the Amish community. However, back, I want to say it was probably in November of 2009, we were at the school where the incident took place on the anniversary of that incident.
Oh.
And we were allowed to sit in the back of the classroom. It was the end of the school day. And it was cool outside, and there was a wood stove in the back of the room. And when class was over, the students were dismissed. And then the teacher's father came, stopped by the schoolhouse. And he was one of the children that ran into the cornfield. Andy Raber. So at that time, we were just sitting down as we are right now and just talking, and there was no recording that was made. But it was a fascinating interview because, of course, he remembers the day from a very different perspective than what we'd read in newspaper accounts.
Okay. Were you?
I'm hearing a lot of crunching and noise or something.
They're working on the school outside of the room we're in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sounds like the phone's being handled or something, maybe, but...
Oh. Were you able to understand the Department of Education's viewpoint? What do you think that was?
Well, I am able to understand it. It was a state standard, and I think it was just an expectation for all students. And I don't know the date that the Amish became established in Iowa, but I suspect the people who drafted the laws didn't sort of take that into account, or didn't realize that would be an issue at some point. And I think it went on for a certain period of time, the law was not enforced. So Art Censor, for example, is the one, I guess, who was put in the position of having to enforce the law, but he really was just doing what the law required him to do. And I think he said now, I know he did in that Des Moines Register article, the more recent one, that he would probably choose to be fired now as opposed to trying to enforce that law as he did.
All right.
So I understand why the state was doing it. There was an expectation that children should receive a basic amount of education for a certain number of years, and under the supervision of a state certified teacher. And that was, I'm sure, seemed like a reasonable objective, and it just didn't fit the way that the Amish educate their children, which is much more the same way as our ancestors did when our ancestors were using the one-room school. And most kids that went to one-room school, many of them didn't go on to high school, and many of them went on to jobs on the farm, and that's why they felt they didn't need that extra education. So I think our ancestors went through a similar period and then decided at some point that education beyond 8th grade was important, and that's why it ended up being sort of formalized in a state law.
Okay, so if you know, did this affect other Amish schools or just the one in Hazleton?
Yeah, that's interesting because there are two Amish incidents that sort of determined how not just Iowa but other states in the U.S. Work with the Amish in connection to education, and the other took place in Wisconsin. So that was a U.S. Supreme Court case called Wisconsin versus Yoder, and so you have this incident in Wisconsin, which I know even less about, but it gets all the way to the Supreme Court, and then you have the incident in Iowa, and those two things together are what has kind of determined how all Amish communities are worked with by various states. You had and the one in Wisconsin is largely a courtroom drama, if you will, versus the cornfield drama that played out in Iowa.
Okay, so I'm sorry, but I have to go, so I'm gonna let Hannah kind of take over now.
Sure.
All right, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. We have talked to Arthur Spencer and Eric Erickson and Mark DeWalt. Mr. Spencer has said that he would not make the same decision again to try and close the school. Do you agree with his decision in the 60s or his thoughts today?
Oh, well, I would tend to agree with the way he has reevaluated it. And that's what he told us, too, when he did the interview with us, that he would make a different decision now. And that's the way it is. Often we reflect on things we did earlier in life, and maybe we would do the same thing. Maybe we would do something different. But he said that he just didn't understand the Amish community as he does now.
Yeah.
I think he still takes issue with the notion of depriving kids of education because you want to keep them from leaving a particular community.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way he described it to us when we interviewed him.
What do you think the impact was of the decision, political and social?
What was the first? You said two things.
What do you think the impact was of the decision, in a political way and in a social way?
Yeah, there was a political element to the incident in the sense that, as I mentioned, it created a kind of an embarrassment for the governor of the state of Iowa, and I think he became very interested in getting it resolved. In favor of the Amish perspective, and so that was kind of unfortunate because you had local officials trying to enforce state law and being asked to enforce state law, and other political forces kind of suggesting that they not do that. So I guess it was just one of those things between people and between viewpoints that had to be worked out. Socially, you have expanding communities in Iowa, Amish communities. And without the compromise that occurred, you don't have that. So, and the other connection between this incident and the Wisconsin one is that some of the folks who early on in the conflict in Iowa decided to leave Iowa and move to Wisconsin. The Amish aren't interested terribly in places that don't want them and where there is going to be ongoing conflict. So had that not been resolved, I think you wouldn't see Amish communities in the state of Iowa. You certainly wouldn't see them expanding as they are and contributing to the agriculture and other elements of the economy in Iowa.
We have researched at the State Historical Library, interviewed Mr. Spencer, Jason Clayworth from the Des Moines Register, Eric Erickson, and Mark DeWalt. We have also been to Hazleton with no luck of speaking to anyone from the Amish community. We sent a letter to Andy Raber, Do you have any additional resources that you might suggest?
Where are you located?
In Council Bluffs, Iowa.
Yeah, so I don't know specifically about coverage of the incident in the Council Bluffs paper, but my guess is that both the Council Bluffs paper and perhaps the Omaha World Herald carried the story at the time it was unfolding.
Uh-huh.
And so years ago when we were working on our first documentary, we did quite a bit of newspaper clipping research, and it was done at the library in Council Bluffs and also across the river in Omaha.
Oh, okay.
They have a lot of the newspapers of that era on microfilm.
Uh-huh.
And you can, the articles that have been written are quite interesting. Now, on the day the incident happened, there were newspaper people present from, of course, the Des Moines Register, but also the Dubuque paper, the Waterloo Courier, the Cedar Rapids Gazette, and others.
Uh-huh.
Art Censor said that when they drove up at the bus that morning that there were something like 17 other vehicles already there. And those were a lot of news people and some other townspeople that had heard that they were going to try to bust the kids.
Uh-huh.
So I guess what I'm saying is that there's a lot of vintage newspaper coverage that would be available to review.
Yeah.
Probably in the form of microfilm.
Mm-hmm. And one last question. Do you have any background information on Amish education in general that you would like to share with us?
I don't. I'm not an expert on that. My father attended one-room schools in Wisconsin, 8 years of one-room school.
Mm-hmm.
And the one-room school system worked because at the time they were active as public schools in this country. They served the needs of the rural community, and at some point our needs changed, and that's why we phased out one-room schools and consolidated schools. But but that's why it still works for the Amish, because in a sense they have that similar need that our ancestors had, a more limited need for education.
Okay, that's all the questions we have for you. So thank you.
You're very welcome.
Mr. Do you have any suggestions for the girls? Things that they need to make sure they absolutely include? Or did you have that one unique interview that really made this stand out for you? They've interviewed Arthur Sensor. They've interviewed Eric Erickson. We've interviewed Bill Sherman.
Right, and Mr. Erickson, what was his role? I don't recognize the name.
He came he was a State Department consultant, and he came after the incident and kind of helped repaired the relationship and became a real advocate for the Amish. So he wasn't in the original incident, but he was interviewed in the Register story.
Okay.
So we were able to track him down. I just didn't know if you had any suggestions, or we're trying to make sure that we've left no stone unturned.
Right. There's one other kind of a resource, I guess you'd call it, is in Independence, Iowa. There's a museum there. I think it's called the Agribition Center, and they have a small exhibit that a couple of people put together that tells the story of this of the Amish incident.
Okay.
Now you can find that either through their website or through maybe a news story about the exhibit, but the two people that put that together, I do not know them, but they might be a potentially helpful resource. I don't know.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your time today, and as Hannah said, we thank you for your time, and we'll keep moving forward, and I'm hoping for good things for the girls. They've worked hard on this.
Wonderful. Well, it'll be interesting to see what they come up with.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.